All right, guys, we just got finished talking about how massive of a recruiting weekend that Clemson just finished up, closing in on those 7 recruits out of the elite retreat and those blue chip guys, and how massive of a momentum builder it is to continue through the 2026 recruiting class. But there has been some questions raised as to why the sudden change in momentum for Clemson on the recruiting trail. What is different? Did Dabo change his philosophy? Is Clemson suddenly got a ton of money they're throwing around, like an Ohio State or programs like that? What is going on in Clemson? What are they doing, Jordan? Why is there a sudden rush of these recruits? And I'm sure it's a multi-layered thing, but in your opinion, what has caused the sudden steep increase in recruiting, especially coming off of a lackluster, let's be honest, 2025 recruiting cycle that kind of fell apart towards the end, and credit to Dabo and the rest of the staff, they kind of pieced it together as best as possible after losing several big time commits. But what is the reason that for the increase, and has Clemson found the right balance for success?
Yeah, I think ultimately what you're seeing with this program is, there is a kind of an injection of life. When you saw, I think it started with winning the ACC championship and making the college football playoff. I do think that was inarguably one of the most important things Clemson could have done, especially coming off the heels of that South Carolina loss.
Yep.
And, I think when you got the ball rolling, it started with the, letting go of Wes Goodwin. And, obviously that ended in the hiring of Tom Allen, and then bringing in, a big time, scout / evaluator / program manager, whatever you want to call it, and Kevin Kelly from the Chargers. And, adding Ben Boulware to the full-time staff, and hiring all of these, and hiring multiple, former position coaches and head coaches onto your staff as analysts. I think there's been an injection of energy, recruiting acumen, just new ideas, all at a really, really quick and short period. And when you couple that with, I think, some of the decisions that Dabo made, previously that are starting to show their returns, like the hiring of Matt Luke. Like I can't tell you how much Matt Luke has meant to this, this whole thing. I mean, the guy is he's not just a great offensive line recruiter. He's a great recruiter in general.
Yes.
And beyond his recruiting acumen, he is a player's coach. He brings just an energy to the building that I think, and this is something that shout out to Faxon Childress over on the Roar, because he did do an interview with Josh Pate, who we'll talk about later, about talking about what Matt Luke has brought to this program. Like, I think when you couple all of those things together, and the messaging that Dabo already has, and the ability to recruit that he already has, and the consistency in the messaging that Dabo has always had, you're seeing the change and the injection of energy and new momentum into Clemson. And I didn't even mention, going to the transfer portal and landing 3 kids. Like, all of those things, I think, put together are what has made Clemson a more attractive place. And there just seems to be, I keep saying new energy, but that's really what it is. There's not a stagnant feeling there. There's a lot of new about what Clemson is, despite being a very established program at this point under Dabo. And so I think Clemson has really found kind of where their niche in terms of where they need to be, as far as how they acquire talent, how they hire staff, how they recruit. I think they're starting to figure all of those things out. I think that the staff is in the best place. I mean, you and I both agree the staff is in miles better in a miles better position than it was just a couple of years ago, when we really had serious doubts about, the collective. I mean, you had some good coaches, but their collective ability to get Clemson back to where they needed to be. We had serious doubts about how they went about their talent acquisition at times. But now there's a feeling that there is a changing of course, and but all while still feeling like Clemson. Like nothing that's happened within the last few months that hasn't felt like, oh, this is out of character for Clemson. Like everything they've done it the way that I would expect Clemson to do it. Going out and getting a guy like Jeremiah Alexander out of the transfer portal, who was silently committed to you before he chose Bama out of high school, and going and getting a guy like Will Helt, who comes from a humble background, wasn't highly recruited, but was really productive on a really terrible Purdue squad, but wanted to come in and be a winner. And then you go and get a guy like Tristan Smith, who was the least recruited out of any of them, and had to and played JUCO and had to work his way up to be attractive to a Power 4 program. So even when you see Dabo do things that he hasn't done before, he does it in a way that is like that's so Dabo. And I think that's what has made Clemson so appealing, is that even when they've done things differently than how they've normally done them, it's still within the character of the program and what Dabo has set. But that's kind of my long-winded explanation, but that's what it is. I mean, they've done things to catch up. They've reevaluated how they do things, but they've done it in a Clemson way. They haven't abandoned their philosophies. They haven't abandoned their principles. And I think that's what's been attractive to recruits.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I couldn't agree more. I think Clemson is and has always been, at least under the tutelage of Dabo Swinney, a very unique program in the way that they approach a lot of things. And Dabo takes a lot of heat for some of the stuff that he says and some of his philosophies on running his program and how he conducts himself and how he builds certain things into his program. But what I will say is part of, the success that you're seeing Clemson is it's a multi-layered thing, right? First and foremost, I think it's the recent hirings that Dabo Swinney has made in the last several years. And you kind of touched on it and mentioned it, but starting with Garrett Riley and then bringing in Matt Luke and then bringing in Chris Rumpf and bringing in Tom Allen. Now there has been a shift in both experience level on the coaching staff, and there's a certain level of intensity that's been brought in specifically by a guy like Matt Luke and Tom Allen now. Those two guys are intense. You can watch the clips of practice. You can see them riling up the guys. You can see them challenging the individual players during various drills that they're going through, whether it's, just conditioning drills or whether it's on the field stuff. They are constantly challenging players. And we already had coaches on staff that were doing that, but it's just increasing that, right? You hear a lot of the player interviews coming out of spring practice. You hear about the intensity of which practice is being conducted with in a very different way than it was maybe last year, right? There's a certain hunger. There's a certain level of want to get back to the top. And it starts with the coaches that Dabo Swinney has hired, right? So that's first and foremost. Secondly, I think they have figured out how to navigate the NIL game a little bit better than they did. They weren't great at it, to be completely honest. Their messaging was a little off, right? And it kind of started with holding our current roster together after the season ended, when Graham Neff, the athletic director, opened up the IPTAY points to donating to the NIL funds, right? Yep. You got the same points as if you were donating to IPTAY for donating to the NIL. So I think part of it is a philosophy shift within the university on just how to handle it and how to generate NIL funds a little bit better, right? Because what I've always said and what you've always said, Jordan, is Clemson doesn't need to get into bidding wars with people. And Dabo Swinney never will. He's made it very clear he will never get into a bidding war with another university to land a recruit. But what I've always said is we don't need to get into bidding wars. We don't even need to pay the most money. We need to get into the ballpark, and then the rest of Clemson that has always sold recruits on coming to Clemson will add that extra lift that you need to land guys. And when you figured it out, you see a weekend like we just had where you rattle off 7 recruits in a recruiting weekend that's not even an official visit weekend, right? And I think it's not that Dabo Swinney's doing really anything that he hasn't done. It's just they figured out how to navigate the new version of college football a little bit better. But the main listen to all the recruits this weekend. Go read their interviews with the various media members that they've met with since they left Clemson. Go look at all of it. They're saying a lot of the same stuff. They're not necessarily talking about football. They're talking about what Dabo Swinney sells as a program, about making them better men, better students, right? The Paul journey, the micro internships, all the extra stuff. That's what gives Clemson an edge. We just had to get into the ballpark when it came to the NIL stuff. And I think part of the House settlement, when that comes, that'll help even the playing field a little bit more for Clemson and give them a little bit more freedom there as well. So I truly think that there has been some sort of balance that has been met. Again, NIL funds are not unlimited. They have to be re-raised every single year, every single team. You have to re-raise the funds and do that stuff. So this stuff is not a guarantee that it's going to continue. But I think Clemson has definitely figured something out, a blend between the future of college football and where it's heading with NIL and paying players, with holding true to what Dabo feels is his true core values of the Clemson program. I don't think he's compromised those at all. I just think he's figured out a way to highlight those with a little bit different approach in this new age of college football that we're in.
Yeah, and you really hit on it, and it's something that, you know, as much hell as the Clemson fan base has given Josh Pate. He did a segment on his show the other night, and he talked about those things. He said that, you know, there is a lot of things that Clemson is different. Like, and I that was one thing that what a lot of national talking heads kind of don't really recognize sometimes. Clemson does do things differently. Clemson is a very unique place, and Josh recognized that, and he said that, you know, he even said, like, there in the past, you know, when the game was a little bit different, like, there were plenty of, and I know plenty of guys that played for Dabo, that worked for Dabo, and all of that, and he said they all say the same thing. It truly is a different place, and that, like, in the past, like, there would have been a lot of players that would have, you know, picked Clemson because of what they offer and what they uniquely offer. Yeah. What Clemson needed to be able to do was be able to package it in a modern way. Like, it was to the point where, that's cool, but when you're not even getting into the ballpark as far as NIL, like, I mean, that's what lost you David Sanders. David Sanders grew up a lifelong Clemson fan.
Yep.
Clemson was his dream school.
Yep.
And that was where it seemed like he wanted to go, but you weren't able to but when you have these schools that are throwing out, you know, dollar figures that you're not even getting close to matching, you're setting yourself up for, you know, to not land kids. And you're setting yourself up also to get, you know, the kids you do land poached, which was what you saw last cycle. So I do think, like you said, and that the way you touched on it, like, Clemson has figured the NIL space out a little bit better than they were before. Even from messaging and from packaging it to the fan base and right, emphasizing it. That's been a really, really big shift. And you mentioned Graham Neff. I think Graham Neff has done a phenomenal job. I don't think he's gotten enough credit, just what he's done as athletic director at Clemson overall. I mean, the state of Clemson athletics in general is in the best place I've seen it. And so I think you have really, really strong leadership that is forward thinking, and you have a coach that's well established, and still recruits love him and want to play for him. And now you have all the modern aspects that other programs are able to do while also selling what Clemson has uniquely to them. And that's something you can't, I mean, that's something other programs won't be able to replicate. And that's, you know, we turned this into a Clemson propaganda segment, but it really is a different place. And I mean, you and I have both, been to Clemson plenty of times. It is a different place.
Man. Yeah, very special place. It's different. I know a lot of places say that, but the amount of recruits, the amount of players, the amount of former coaches that speak about Clemson, all those people can't be just saying the same thing just to say it.
Exactly. Even opposing fans, visiting fans, there is nobody more glowing and complimentary of Clemson than the opposing fan base. Typically, just seeing how other fans that weren't brought up into the Clemson sphere or whatever, and seeing them see what it is like, that sold me if I wasn't sold already.
That's right.